Dear friends, welcome to my channel Let's Read. From the timeless collection of Khushwant Singh, let's read No Status for Saints. Let's begin with the story. He was never quite the same after it happened. Not that I had seen him before, but my companions had. They recalled him as a well to do, self centered young fellow, always keeping to himself. Recently, Khush Khabar had been full of him, and we too couldn't stop talking about him. Notorious characters exercise a strange fascination. We used to go for a long morning walks. Each one of us was at the stage of life when walking was the only exercise left to us. Walking down to Chowpatty all the way from Nariman Point, we would squat at the foot of Lokmanya Tilak's statue to recover our breath. He never joined us, but always sat a stone's throw away under the Vittal Bhai Patel's statue. The crows communicated better than we did, showering their indiscretions on a stone puggree as on wavy hair of stone. What he does with his life is his own business, said Pacey. He was panting heavily, rubbing his close cropped head with a handkerchief. But that he should not have played with the life of his only daughter. That is something I won't forgive. Say, did you read the judgment in yesterday's Khush Khabar? Asked Manchi. The old man really let him have it? Khush Khabar front paged it and continued across half of page 9. No wonder. They say it's the worst scandal in Parsi history, opined Dinshaw. Wonder how he can still show his face in public? I wonder, I said. Now that the case is closed, how Khush Khabar is going to fill its pages? My companions were used to my irreverence and had long ago ceased to take notice of it. But let me tell you about Khush Khabar. It was one of the two dailies circulating almost exclusively among my community. At one time, it had been the last bastion of the British Raj in India. Now, its pages were full of weighty problems such as the shamelessness of Parsi girls who wore cholis so abbreviated that it was obvious that they put on neither Sudra nor Kasti, and who were now beginning to sport the salwar kameez, which wasn't a Parsi dress at all. Its pages were enlivened by controversies as to which of the three Parsi New Years was the correct one to celebrate. It printed verbatim accounts of divorce proceedings in the Parsi matrimonial court. Khush Khabar, which means happy news, was a misnomer. Happy news is no news at all. Well, Kirasp, for that was the name of a companion under the other statue, had for the past so many months been illustrating the morning's headline for us. His coat hung loosely from his shoulders as from a hanger. His cheap cotton socks fell over his bony ankles onto his canvas shoes. His curly hair, standing up all around his head, gave him a rather wild look. He walked with an eccentric springiness, and when he reached for his faded felt, his walking stick, he did so with quick darting movements. No. I didn't read the judgment, Pacey went on, opening his shirt buttons and starting to rub his chest and the back of his neck. But I read his wife's testimony. His ex-wife, you mean? Manji interrupted. What if she is his ex-wife? Cried Pacey. Even when excited, he looked like one of those tubby statues of the Buddha in repose. His doctor had warned him to shed 50 pounds or else. What that simple God-fearing woman had to go through, no Parsi woman should be allowed to go through. And all because of a woman from Falkland Road, a cheap 30-rupee prostitute? I couldn't contribute to the discussion because I never read Khush Khabar. My prejudices against it were political, dating from the freedom struggle, but scandal intrigued me vastly. So my contribution to the conversation comprised mostly questions followed by exclamations. I tell you, our community is going to the dogs. Pacey was on to his favorite topic. Time was when you couldn't find a Parsi beggar in the streets of Bombay. We used to boast there was not a single prostitute in our community. Can we do so now? All because of men like him. Pacey should have been the official historian of our community. Instead, he is a sandalwood seller in the vicinity of Vadiyaji's fire temple on the Princess Street. Manchi is a bank clerk. He has a lean and hungry look and has spent a lifetime counting other people's money. Dinshaw is an insurance salesman, always talking gloomily about safeguarding against what he euphemistically refers to as the occurrence. I work for the Daily News. Don't let his alarm you. You won't find the byline by S.M. Powry staring at you from the editorial page of the news. I belong to the anonymous clan of political reporters. The crispy, salty early morning air invigorated our talk. Behind us, Back Bay was still enshrouded in a haze of sleepy blue, but Malabar Hill in front of us emerged as a developing photograph, glass panes glinting in the sun, buildings defined into jagged squares and rectangulars, the dark background rolling into lush green. Fishing nets spread out to dry on the sand almost reached the water's edge. The sea was still in a glass eyed trance, not a ripple, not a cloud to reflect. A fishing boat, sails drooping, lay still as in a painting. I would like to think that it was my professional nose for news that led me to the story. The truth is that had not the story landed in my lap, I wouldn't even have realized there was a story. You just try listening to and reporting ministers' speeches continuously for a decade and you'll understand. We had just refreshed ourselves with the sweet milk of coconuts, as was our normal practice before going to our separate ways, when I noticed unusual activity under the other statue. A friend appeared to be trying to lie down full length on the pedestal. He then sat up for a moment and again rolled down, arms and legs rigid, onto the footpath. My God! I cried. I think our friend's having a fit or something. Sure enough, when we rushed to him, we found him drenched in sweat, gasping incoherently through clenched teeth. He was trying feverishly to extract something from his left hand trouser pocket. We took it out for him, a small bottle containing some pink pills, pentanitrine probably. Biting hard on one of these seemed to give him temporary relief. The wrinkles round his eyes and mouth cobwebbed his face. We inquired if there was anything else we could do to help. All he wanted was that we should get a taxi which could take him to hospital. Pacey just stood there with his mouth open, though for once no word came from it. Dinshaw had the ghastly look as when confronted by the occurrence. However, he helped Munchie take grasp to the city. I followed carrying his hat and walking stick, feeling rather superfluous. However, I more than made up for it by accompanying him in the taxi. My only concern was to take him to the hospital as fast as possible and leave him there. On the way, he seemed to have other paroxysm. Perhaps the exertion was too much for him. I felt strangely helpless to do anything. I thought of the look on Dinshaw's face and began muttering the 101 names of the Prophet that he shouldn't die on my hands. When at last we reached the hospital and the nurses took over, I breathed a sigh of relief. But they asked me to wait. As he lay breathing on the bed, I found I couldn't feel pity for him. My bourgeois morality seethed inside me. As the cardiogram machine was rolled in and the sister began to strap his ankles and wrist, the sordid details from the sensational trial came vividly to my mind. A young girl on the abortionist table, her legs held high and ankles clamped to the canvas hooks hanging from the ceiling. And that girl, this man's daughter, brought to the abortionist by him, this man now gasping his death agony. How right our prophet was, heaven or hell, we encounter in this life itself. When the doctor arrived, a sister took me aside for questioning. I gave her his name and informed her that to the best of my knowledge, he worked in a film processing laboratory. She wanted to know how I was related to the patient and produced some forms for me to fill up. I took no time in delusioning her. She inquired who, since the patient's condition was serious, she would inform. I couldn't advise her whether it should be the ex-wife or the other woman. I got out of the predicament by saying I had another pressing engagement, assuring her that I would return later in the day and answer all her questions. The forms meant so much to her, I even promised to fill them up as fast as he could produce them. I needn't have returned, but I am glad I did. Otherwise, I might never have met Krista. The hospital room smelled strongly of disinfectant. The fowler bed, now empty, had been freshly made. A woman was standing near the window, her back to me. She was in a dark grey sheath dress and appeared to be Eurasian. The stoop of her shoulders, her bowed head conveyed the news even before she turned to face me. I introduced myself. She listened, head still bowed, her face pale and drawn as if all blood, all feeling had been drained from it. Already they have taken him away, she said in a low, flat voice. I mumbled how sorry I was. I knew it was coming. Since the trial, I knew it. Then, in a whisper with the slightest trace of a tremor, confidingly, it was over before. It was over before I could come. I will not be able to pay even my last respects. There is a place set apart at Dungarwadi, I hurried to explain, where non-Parsis can wait and watch the body being carried away to the tower. But she will be there, his wife. Well, it's the wife's right, I suppose. A cloud crossed her face, her eyes flashed. She will not be there as his wife, she will be there as a god's representative. What a thing to say, I cried, past resentment against this woman welling up. You, of all people, shouldn't be saying it. Oh, you two are sitting in judgment? Another of God's representatives? Her lips trembled. Without warning, she broke into a muffled whimpering. You will never forgive. You will never let a woman forget what she was. She wrung her hands in a gesture of utter helplessness, then clasping them in front of her, hurried to the door. I was too taken aback to say or to do anything. At the door, she stopped and, with a tremendous effort to keep her voice steady, added, I thank you very much for being so kind as not to let him die in the streets like a dog. For Pacey and other, Kirasp's death was the end of the chapter. They couldn't spare a thought for the woman, but her face came to me at night. It came again and again, through the heavy curtain of sleep, convention, and pretense peeling off in layer after layer, till I was looking at the naked face of suffering. I couldn't reason to myself why, but I had to see her again. Getting her address was no problem. What she did, where she stayed, who she saw, it was all over the papers. She stayed in a guest house in a street of Kolaba Causeway, in a partitioned room in which one could hardly move without knocking over something. The bright curtains worked magic with it, so that it looked like a doll's house. She didn't seem surprised to me, at least she didn't show it. She offered me the single chair while she sat on the bed. Her face now had a look of calm repose, almost of resignation. Her soft brown hair, tied at the nape with a ribbon and highlighted with silver streaks, contrasted with her comparatively young face. I began lamely that I felt I owed her an apology. She countered charmingly, No, I should not have spoken about his wife the way I did. Still less about you, Mr. Powry. I had no excuse, no right to speak such things. You will accept my apology, please? The grace and charm where I had expected coarseness won me over. I was ready to be swept off my feet. Gallantly I insisted, It is I who owe you an apology because I misjudged you. I was prejudiced by all that the papers wrote. But what the papers wrote about me, it was correct. She said quietly, I was what they say I was. For 11 terrible years, what they did not write was that I despised that life, despised myself, and what I got out of it? Yes, he made me get out of it. I hadn't quite expected this confession, yet I noticed something totally irrelevant, that she couldn't pronounce her H and R's. With the convert's zeal, I cried, That's why I'm here. I want to know more about him and about you. I sense a story here. I've got to have the story. But it is too late. No, the word exploded out of me, making her smile. I smiled too. She shrugged her shoulders and I drove my point home. Dear friends, this is end of the part 1. Please stay tuned to know what was the actual story. I will cover that in part 2.